The first tremor was so faint that it passed unnoticed by most. It was just another day on Earth, a morning filled with the usual hustle and bustle. People continued their routines, oblivious to the slight shift beneath their feet. The ground quivered ever so gently, like the breath of a sleeping giant. Only a few attuned individuals, perhaps a geologist sipping coffee in a remote lab or a farmer standing in a field, paused long enough to sense that something was different. But it was easy to dismiss. After all, the Earth was alive, constantly moving and shifting. A small tremor wasn't enough to cause alarm, so life went on. Then came the second tremor, stronger this time. It rippled through the ground, causing ripples in ponds, shaking loose stones, and rattling windows. This time, people noticed. The news began to pick up scattered reports of minor seismic activity, but the consensus was that it was nothing to worry about, just a natural occurrence. Yet, the tremors kept coming, each one slightly stronger than the last. As days turned into weeks, the frequency of these tremors grew. They were no longer just small shifts beneath the Earth's crust. They were becoming more forceful, more pronounced. The media began to take notice, dedicating segments to the strange phenomena. Scientists were interviewed, offering cautious explanations. Most suggested it was just a series of small earthquakes, nothing more. But as the tremors persisted, skepticism began to creep into the public consciousness. The explanations felt inadequate, leaving a gnawing sense of unease. In a nondescript military base buried deep in the desert, General Harrison Coleman stood in front of a wall of monitors, his brow furrowed in concentration. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the soft glow of screens displaying data, maps, and satellite imagery. The general was a man of few words, known for his stoic demeanor and unwavering focus. He had served in the military for over 3 decades, earning a reputation as a strategic thinker and a leader who remained calm under pressure. But today, something was different. There was a tension in the air, a sense that things were not as they should be. He turned to his second-in-command, Colonel Jennifer Reese, a sharp-minded officer with a background in military intelligence. She was known for her analytical skills and her ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. "What do we have so far?" General Coleman asked, his voice steady, but with a hint of unease. Reese glanced at the screens, then back at the general. "Sir, we've been tracking these tremors since they began. At first, they appeared random, but now we're seeing a pattern. They're not originating from tectonic plate boundaries. In fact, they don't align with any known fault lines." The general's eyes narrowed. "If not natural, then what?" "We're not sure yet," Reese replied, her voice betraying her frustration. "But something about this doesn't add up. We've also picked up some unusual signals, very faint, almost imperceptible. They're not from any known satellite or Earth-based source." General Coleman's gaze sharpened. He knew Reese well enough to trust her instincts. If she was concerned, there was reason to be. "Keep digging. I want to know what's causing these tremors and what those signals are." Meanwhile, in a small university lab miles away, Dr. Emily Carter was growing increasingly frustrated. She was a seismologist, and for the past few weeks, she had been studying the data from the recent tremors. Something about them didn't sit right with her. She was no stranger to earthquakes and had spent years analyzing seismic activity, but these tremors defied everything she knew. They didn't fit any recognizable pattern. It was as if the Earth was shaking for no reason at all. Dr. Carter was a brilliant scientist, known for her meticulous approach to research and her tendency to question everything. She was in her early 40s, with sharp features and an intensity that often made her seem unapproachable. Her work was her life, and she had little patience for anything that distracted from it. But these tremors were different. They gnawed at her, kept her awake at night, and occupied her thoughts even when she wasn't in the lab. She pored over the data again, scrutinizing every detail, every spike and dip in the readings. There was something there, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She reached for her phone and called a colleague, hoping for a fresh perspective. "Hey, Emily," the voice on the other end greeted her. "You sound stressed. What's up?" "I've been looking at the data from these tremors," Dr. Carter replied, her voice tense. "Something doesn't add up. They're not behaving like any seismic activity I've ever seen. It's almost like they're deliberate." "Deliberate? Like man-made?" her colleague asked, incredulous. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this than we're seeing." As the tremors continued, people across the globe began to feel the effects. In cities, buildings swayed ever so slightly, causing unease among residents. In rural areas, animals behaved erratically, sensing something amiss. And in coastal towns, the sea itself seemed restless, with waves crashing against the shore with more force than usual. Panic was beginning to set in. Governments were under pressure to provide answers, but there were none to give. The tremors were a mystery, one that no one could solve. And then, in a remote part of the Pacific Ocean, something happened that would change everything. A fishing boat, out on a routine trip, encountered something in the water, something metallic and unnatural. The crew was baffled, unsure of what they had stumbled upon. They took pictures, recorded video, and reported their find to the authorities. The images and footage soon made their way to General Coleman's desk. He studied them carefully, his expression unreadable. The object was clearly not of earthly origin. It was sleek, with sharp angles and a surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There was no mistaking it. This was a reconnaissance drone. But from where? The implications were staggering. General Coleman set the images aside and turned to Colonel Reese. "We need to mobilize," he said quietly. "We're not dealing with a natural disaster. This is something far more dangerous." As the realization of what they were facing began to sink in, a cold dread settled over the room. The tremors, the signals, the mysterious object, all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Earth was being invaded, and no one had seen it coming. General Harrison Coleman sat alone in his office, the images of the alien drone still fresh in his mind. He wasn't one to rattle easily, but this was different. For the first time in his long career, he felt a genuine sense of foreboding. He had faced many threats in his time, from rogue states to global terrorism, but this was something entirely new. An enemy they couldn't see, one that had already infiltrated their world without a single shot being fired. The tremors, the strange signals, and now the discovery in the Pacific, it was all connected, and it pointed to one terrifying conclusion. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Colonel Reese entered, her face as unreadable as ever, but her eyes betrayed a hint of concern. "General, we've run further analysis on the drone," she began, handing him a tablet. "It's unlike anything we've encountered before. The materials, the technology, it's beyond our current capabilities. We've also detected faint energy signatures emanating from the object, suggesting it's still operational on some level." General Coleman took the tablet, studying the data displayed on the screen. The drone was indeed unlike anything they had ever seen. It was sleek, almost organic in design, with a surface that seemed to ripple like liquid metal. The energy readings were low, but consistent, indicating that the drone was still active, though dormant. "What's its purpose?" he asked, more to himself than to Reese. "We're not entirely sure," Reese admitted, "but its design suggests reconnaissance. It's likely gathering data on us, on our planet." "Has there been any communication from it? Any attempt to contact us?" Coleman asked, his voice steady but with an underlying urgency. "None," Reese replied. "It's been completely silent, other than the energy readings. We've also been unable to trace its origin. The signals we intercepted earlier were too faint, too scrambled to pinpoint where they came from." General Coleman leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. The implications were staggering. An advanced alien civilization had not only discovered Earth, but had also managed to breach its defenses without detection. What was their intent? Were they here to observe, or was this a prelude to something more sinister? "Prepare a full report for the Joint Chiefs," he ordered finally. "We need to start planning for the worst-case scenario." "Understood, sir," Reese nodded, turning to leave. As the door closed behind her, General Coleman allowed himself a moment of reflection. He knew the situation was dire, but there was no time for hesitation. The world was in danger, and they had to act quickly. In another part of the world, Dr. Emily Carter was still poring over the seismic data. The more she analyzed it, the more she became convinced that these tremors were not natural. There was a pattern, a deliberate rhythm to the movements, as if the Earth itself was being manipulated by some external force. The realization chilled her to the bone. She glanced at the clock. It was late, but she couldn't tear herself away from her work. She needed answers, something to explain the growing sense of dread that had taken hold of her. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. What if these tremors were the result of some underground activity, a precursor to an attack? What if something was burrowing beneath the earth, destabilizing the very ground they stood on? Her thoughts were interrupted by a notification on her computer. It was a message from a colleague at a research facility in Europe, someone she had worked with during a previous project. The message was brief, but its contents were enough to make her heart skip a beat. "Emily, I think you need to see this. We've been picking up some strange readings, seismic activity that doesn't match any known geological patterns. It's as if the Earth is vibrating at specific frequencies. I've attached the data. Let me know what you think." She quickly opened the attachment, her eyes scanning the data. It was similar to what she had been seeing, but more concentrated, more intense. The frequencies were uniform, almost mechanical in nature. It was as if something was drilling into the earth, carving out pathways beneath the surface. Dr. Carter's hands trembled as she typed out a response. "I'm seeing the same thing here. This isn't natural. It's too consistent, too controlled. I think we need to alert the authorities." She hesitated for a moment before hitting send. There was a part of her that wanted to dismiss the possibility, to chalk it up to some strange, but ultimately harmless, natural phenomenon. But the evidence was overwhelming. Something was happening beneath their feet, something that defied explanation. As the night wore on, Dr. Carter couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Whatever was causing these tremors, it was getting closer. The vibrations were growing stronger, more frequent, as if the source was moving towards them. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, in a small coastal town, a young man named Ethan Reeves was experiencing the tremors firsthand. He had grown up in this town, a quiet place where nothing much ever happened. But in recent weeks, everything had changed. The ground shook almost daily now, and each time it was stronger than before. Ethan was no stranger to earthquakes. He had lived through a few in his time, but this was different. There was an unnatural quality to the way the ground moved, as if something was pushing up from beneath the surface. It left him with a sense of unease that he couldn't shake. His father, a retired fisherman, had told him stories of strange things he had seen in the ocean lights beneath the waves, objects that moved too fast to be any kind of marine life. Ethan had always dismissed these stories as the ramblings of an old man, but now he wasn't so sure. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood on the beach, staring out at the sea. The water was unusually calm, a stark contrast to the turmoil beneath the ground. He had come here to clear his head, to escape the growing tension in town. But as he stood there, a deep rumble resonated from below, stronger than anything he had felt before. He watched in horror as the sand beneath his feet began to shift, creating small cracks that quickly spread along the beach. The sea itself seemed to respond, the water pulling back as if recoiling from something unseen. And then, in the distance, he saw a dark shape emerging from the water, sleek and metallic, glinting in the fading light. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He knew, without a doubt, that whatever this thing was, it didn't belong here. The stories his father had told him flashed through his mind, and suddenly they didn't seem so far-fetched. He turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to warn the others, had to tell them what he had seen. But deep down, he knew it was already too late. The invasion had begun, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. General Harrison Coleman sat in his office, the weight of the newly discovered alien drone pressing heavily on his mind. The room was silent except for the faint hum of equipment and the occasional distant murmur from the base. He knew that the implications of this discovery extended far beyond his immediate responsibilities. The realization that Earth was being invaded required swift and decisive action. Colonel Jennifer Reese stood beside him, her expression serious. "Sir, we need to inform the Joint Chiefs immediately. This changes everything." Coleman nodded, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. "Prepare a secure channel. I want full details on my desk in the next 30 minutes." As Reese left the room to carry out his orders, Coleman leaned back, his thoughts racing. He recalled the images of the drone, the sleek, metallic surface that seemed almost alive. This was no ordinary reconnaissance mission. The technology was advanced, far beyond anything Earth had developed. The question that now plagued him was not just about the presence of the aliens, but their intentions. In Washington, D.C., the atmosphere was tense. The president convened an emergency meeting with top military advisors, including General Coleman and Colonel Reese. The room was filled with officials from various government agencies, all eager for answers. The president addressed the assembly, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "General Coleman, brief us on the situation." Coleman stood, his demeanor calm yet authoritative. "Mr. President, the object recovered from the Pacific is a reconnaissance drone of extraterrestrial origin. Its technology indicates an advanced civilization capable of stealth and sophisticated communication. We believe this marks the beginning of a coordinated invasion." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. The Secretary of Defense leaned forward, concern etched on his face. "What do we know about their capabilities? How prepared are we to defend against such technology?" Reese took the floor, presenting the data they had gathered. "The drone's energy signatures suggest it is still operational, but currently dormant. Its design indicates that it was likely gathering intelligence on Earth's defenses, infrastructure, and population centers. Our primary concern is that this is just the first of many such devices." The president absorbed the information, his expression unreadable. "What is our current defensive posture?" Coleman replied, "Our satellites have been compromised, making traditional surveillance and communication methods unreliable. We are working to establish secure lines, but it will take time. We need to anticipate their next move and respond accordingly." A representative from the intelligence community spoke up. "We've detected faint signals that may be related to the drones. They appear to be coordinated, suggesting a larger fleet is preparing to enter Earth's atmosphere." The room fell silent as the magnitude of the situation settled in. The realization that humanity was facing an organized extraterrestrial threat was overwhelming. The president took a deep breath, looking around the room at the assembled officials. "We need to act quickly and decisively. General Coleman, Colonel Reese, I want a task force established immediately. Coordinate with international allies and begin preparations for potential defensive actions. Inform the public only when we have concrete information to share." Coleman nodded. "Understood, Mr. President. We will proceed with utmost urgency." Meanwhile, Dr. Emily Carter was at her university lab, still grappling with the anomalous seismic data. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a message from the colleague in Europe she had contacted earlier. The urgency in his tone matched her own growing anxiety. She quickly read the latest data he had sent, comparing it with her own findings. The patterns were consistent, reinforcing her belief that the tremors were not natural. Determined to uncover the truth, she began compiling her research, preparing to present it to the authorities. As she worked, her mind wandered to the implications of her discoveries. If the tremors were indeed deliberate, orchestrated by an external force, what did that mean for humanity? The thought weighed heavily on her, filling her with a sense of dread she couldn't shake. In the coastal town where Ethan Reeves lived, the atmosphere was equally tense. The sighting of the metallic object in the water had left the community on edge. Reports of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena were becoming more frequent. Residents were scared, unsure of what was happening or what was to come. Ethan sat in his small apartment, staring at the screen of his phone. News outlets were scrambling to cover the story, But information was limited and often conflicting. He thought about his father's stories, tales of unexplained lights and objects beneath the waves. Now, they seemed less like folklore and more like ominous warnings. A sudden, intense tremor shook the building, rattling windows and sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Ethan winced, feeling the ground beneath him quake with unsettling regularity. He glanced at the clock. It was late, but sleep eluded him. The persistent tremors were a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong. He decided to take a walk to clear his mind, heading towards the beach where he had seen the drone. The night air was cool, the sky clear, except for the occasional flicker of lightning from a distant storm. As he walked along the shoreline, the rhythmic sound of waves provided a stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind. Suddenly, another tremor hit, more powerful than before. The ground beneath his feet quivered violently, causing him to stumble. He looked out over the water, half expecting to see the drone return, but the sea remained calm, almost unnaturally so. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp, metallic noise coming from the water. He turned to see the drone once more emerging from the depths, its surface glinting under the moonlight. Panic surged through him as he realized the severity of the situation. This was not a one-time occurrence, this was the beginning of an invasion. He sprinted back to his apartment, heart pounding, needing to warn his neighbors and anyone else who would listen. The streets were empty, the usual nighttime calm replaced by an eerie silence. As he reached his building, he saw a group of people gathered in the lobby, fear evident on their faces. "We need to leave," Ethan shouted, his voice breaking with urgency. "It's happening again. They are invading." People looked at him with a mix of fear and confusion. Some began to call emergency services, while others huddled together, seeking comfort in numbers. The reality of the invasion was sinking in, and with it came a wave of emotions: fear, anger, sorrow, and a profound sense of loss. Across the globe, similar scenes were unfolding. Families were torn apart by sudden attacks on their cities, lives lost in the chaos. The alien forces struck preemptively, targeting major population centers with devastating precision. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble in moments, leaving survivors to grapple with the aftermath of unimaginable destruction. In New York City, skyscrapers that had stood for decades were toppled with ease, their collapse sending plumes of smoke and debris into the sky. Emergency responders worked tirelessly to save lives, but the scale of the devastation was overwhelming. Hospitals were inundated with the injured, and morgues quickly filled beyond capacity. In Tokyo, a once bustling metropolis was thrown into chaos as alien ships descended, unleashing waves of destructive energy. The ground shook with each attack, buildings crumbling under the force. People ran through the streets, desperate to escape the relentless assault, their cries echoing through the night. The emotional toll was immense. Families lost loved ones in an instant, their grief compounded by the helplessness of witnessing their homes and communities destroyed. Survivors struggled with the trauma of what they had experienced, the horror of the invasion leaving deep scars that would take years to heal. Back at the military base, General Coleman and Colonel Reese monitored the global situation with increasing alarm. Reports of attacks were flooding in from every corner of the world, each one more devastating than the last. The international community was in disarray, struggling to coordinate a unified response against the alien threat. In the midst of the chaos, a secretive faction within the military revealed a classified project known as War Beasts. These genetically engineered super soldiers had been in development for decades, designed to respond to scenarios just like this one. The War Beasts were a blend of human and alien DNA, creating beings of immense strength, speed, and resilience. The revelation of the War Beasts added a new layer of complexity to the crisis. On one hand, they represented humanity's best chance to counter the alien invasion. On the other, their existence raised profound ethical questions. Creating living weapons had always been controversial, and deploying them in this desperate situation forced the world to confront the moral implications of their use. General Coleman convened an urgent meeting with his top advisors to discuss the deployment of the War Beasts. The room was filled with military strategists, scientists, and ethical advisors, each bringing their own perspective to the table. "We have no choice," Coleman stated firmly. "These war beasts are our last line of defense. Without them, we stand little chance against the alien forces." A scientist spoke up, her voice filled with concern. "But General, these beings are not fully understood. Their capabilities are beyond anything we've encountered. We don't know how they'll react in the field or the long-term consequences of their deployment." Coleman met her gaze, unwavering. "We do not have the luxury of time. The alien attacks are escalating, and we need every advantage we can get. These war beasts were created for this very purpose." Another advisor raised a moral question. "What about the ethical implications of using genetically engineered soldiers? These beings have consciousness and emotions. We are effectively unleashing living weapons upon the world." Coleman sighed, the weight of leadership pressing down on him. "I understand the concerns, but right now, our priority is survival. We need to protect humanity, even if it means making difficult decisions." After much deliberation, the decision was made to deploy the war beasts. As the order was given, the war beasts were mobilized, their presence a beacon of hope amidst the overwhelming despair. They moved with precision and ferocity, countering the alien forces with a level of efficiency that turned the tide of the battles. The deployment of the war beasts marked a turning point in the invasion. For the first time, humanity had a fighting chance against the advanced alien technology. But the victory was bittersweet, as the world grappled with the moral and ethical ramifications of unleashing such powerful beings upon the battlefield. The sense of unease that had settled over the world in the days following the first contact had grown into something much darker. The skies seemed perpetually overcast, heavy with a dread that pressed down on the hearts of all who looked up. The revelation of the impending invasion had shocked humanity to its core. News outlets struggled to keep pace with the flow of information, much of it disjointed and confusing. But the message was clear: Earth was under attack. From the Pentagon to the Kremlin, from Beijing to Brussels, the realization dawned that this was not a skirmish, but a war of survival. As the truth about the invasion slowly came to light, world leaders abandoned old rivalries, driven by the sobering reality of a common enemy that threatened all life on Earth. The United Nations, usually slow and cumbersome in its decision-making, became a hub of frantic activity. An emergency session, broadcasted live to every corner of the globe, saw representatives from nearly every nation standing side by side, their differences momentarily set aside. They formed a coalition, hastily named the Global Defense Alliance (GDA), to coordinate humanity's response to the invasion. Amid the rising tension, the skies erupted in fire. The alien forces struck without warning, their attacks swift and devastating. Earth's satellite communications, the backbone of global connectivity, were the first to fall. With them went the world's ability to communicate and coordinate across vast distances. Panic spread as the world was plunged into darkness, severed from the satellites that had become so integral to daily life. Governments scrambled to re-establish contact, but the aliens had anticipated every move, disrupting attempts to rebuild networks with ruthless efficiency. And then came the attacks on the ground. Cities that had stood for centuries, monuments to human achievement, crumbled under the alien onslaught. New York, London, Tokyo, Cairo, all were reduced to rubble within hours. The aliens' technology was unlike anything Earth had ever encountered. Their weapons tore through concrete and steel as if they were paper, leaving nothing but devastation in their wake. The world watched in horror as live feeds from the few remaining news channels showed the scale of the destruction. Families huddled together in their homes, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of television screens as they witnessed the world burn. The screams of those trapped beneath the rubble, the sight of bodies strewn across the streets, the smoke that choked the air, it was all too much to bear. In the aftermath of each strike, the grief and anger were palpable. In the faces of those who survived, there was a haunting emptiness. They had lost everything: their homes, their loved ones, their sense of security. The sorrow that swept the globe was deep, a wound that seemed impossible to heal. but alongside it grew a burning hatred, a desire for revenge against the invaders who had brought this suffering upon them. In military bunkers and secret facilities around the world, plans were hastily put into action. The governments knew that conventional forces were no match for the alien threat. They needed something more, something that could turn the tide in humanity's favor. It was then that a classified project, long kept hidden from the public eye, was brought into the light. Codenamed War Beasts, it was the culmination of decades of research and development. These were not ordinary soldiers, but genetically engineered super soldiers, bred and trained in absolute secrecy for scenarios just like this one. The War Beasts were the product of a dark chapter in military history, where ethics had been sacrificed in the name of national security. Enhanced beyond the limits of human capability, they were stronger, faster, and more resilient than any human could ever be. They were designed to be the ultimate weapons, capable of taking on any enemy, no matter how advanced. But their creation came at a cost. The moral dilemmas surrounding the war beasts were profound. They were not born, but made, their humanity stripped away in the process of turning them into weapons of war. Their existence was a reminder of the lengths to which humanity would go to ensure its survival, even if it meant creating monsters of its own. As the war beasts were prepared for deployment, the world held its breath. The decision to unleash them was not made lightly. It was a gamble, a last-ditch effort to defend the planet from annihilation. The war beasts were Earth's last line of defense, and their success or failure would determine the fate of all humanity. In the silence that followed the alien attacks, the world waited. The fear was palpable, but so was the resolve. This was a fight for survival, and humanity would not go down without a fight. The devastation caused by the alien strikes left the world in shock, but the time for mourning was short. As the dust settled over the ruins of cities, humanity was thrust into a fight for its very existence. The scale of the destruction was staggering, and the response had to be swift and decisive. In the early hours of the morning, as the sun struggled to pierce the haze of smoke that hung over the landscape, the alien forces launched a coordinated assault on key military and civilian targets across the globe. It was a meticulously planned operation, designed to cripple humanity's ability to resist. With the loss of satellite communications, governments and military forces were forced to rely on outdated methods of coordination: couriers, radio transmissions, and local command centers. It was a desperate situation, made worse by the sheer ferocity of the alien attacks. In every city, the story was the same. Alien warships descended from the sky, their dark, angular forms cutting through the clouds like harbingers of death. Energy beams lanced from their hulls, vaporizing anything in their path. Buildings crumbled, and the streets ran red with blood. The destruction was indiscriminate. Men, women, children, soldiers, and civilians alike were caught in the onslaught. The death toll climbed rapidly, each new report more horrifying than the last. In New York, the skyline was reduced to a jagged silhouette of twisted steel and shattered glass. The Statue of Liberty, a symbol of freedom and resilience, was nothing more than a molten husk, its torch extinguished forever. In London, the iconic Big Ben Tower lay in ruins, the clock face shattered, its hands frozen in time, a grim reminder of the moment the city fell. In Beijing, the Great Wall, a monument to human perseverance, was torn asunder, its ancient stones scattered across the landscape like the bones of a long-dead civilization. The survivors, those who had managed to escape the immediate carnage, were left to wander through the wreckage, searching for loved ones, for any sign of life. Their faces were streaked with soot and tears, their eyes hollow with grief and shock. The air was thick with a stench of burning flesh and the acrid smell of smoldering debris. Cries for help echoed through the streets, but there were few who could answer. The hospitals were overwhelmed, their wards filled to capacity with the wounded and dying. The medics worked tirelessly, their hands trembling from exhaustion, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they could not save everyone. In the midst of this chaos, anger began to bubble to the surface. The rage was uncontrollable, a primal response to the unimaginable loss. It was a fire that spread as quickly as the flames consuming the cities. It burned in the hearts of those who had lost everything, a hatred so deep and intense that it seemed to sear the very soul. This was not just anger, it was a consuming fury, an all-encompassing desire for revenge against the invaders who had brought this apocalypse upon them. In underground bunkers and fortified command centers, the global leaders, now part of the hastily formed Global Defense Alliance, grappled with the enormity of the situation. Desperation hung heavy in the air as they reviewed the damage reports and listened to the pleas of their people. The war had begun, and humanity was on the brink of annihilation. It was in this atmosphere of despair and determination that the war beasts were finally brought to light. The existence of these genetically engineered soldiers had been a closely guarded secret, known only to a select few within the highest echelons of military power. The project had been conceived during a different time, when the threat of alien invasion had seemed a distant possibility, something to be prepared for but not taken seriously. Now, it was humanity's last hope. The war beasts were unlike anything the world had ever seen. Bred for combat, they were a fusion of human ingenuity and raw power. Their bodies were augmented with the latest advancements in biotechnology, muscles reinforced with carbon nanotubes, bones strengthened with advanced polymers, and neural networks enhanced to process information at lightning speed. They possessed the strength of 10 men, the reflexes of a predator, and a resilience that bordered on invulnerability. Each one was a living weapon, capable of unleashing devastation on a scale that even the aliens would find formidable. But with their power came a dark history. The war beasts had been created at great ethical cost. Cloned from the genetic material of the strongest and most skilled soldiers, they had been raised in isolation, trained from birth in the arts of war. Their humanity had been systematically stripped away, replaced with a singular purpose: to protect Earth at any cost. The project had been controversial from the start, and many within the military had opposed it, citing the moral implications of creating soldiers without the capacity for fear, compassion, or mercy. But in the face of the alien threat, those concerns were cast aside. The war beasts were a necessary evil, the ultimate weapon in a war that could not be won by conventional means. As the decision was made to deploy the war beasts, there was a palpable sense of finality. This was the last line of defense, the ultimate gamble. If they failed, there would be nothing left to protect. The order was given, and the war beasts, held in stasis for decades, were awakened. Their eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, opened for the first time in years. They were ready to fight. And so, as the world teetered on the edge of destruction, the war beasts were unleashed. The battle for Earth had truly begun, and the fate of humanity now rested in the hands of these engineered warriors. The question that lingered in the minds of those who had created them was not just whether they could win the war, but whether humanity could survive what they had unleashed. The deployment of the war beasts marked a turning point in the battle for Earth. The decision, made in the coldest and most calculating of circumstances, was fraught with a tension that could be cut with a knife. The war beasts were not just soldiers, they were a last hope, a desperate measure in a fight that was rapidly spiraling out of control. The war beasts were housed in a clandestine military facility located deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Known as the Hollow Bastion, this underground complex had been built during the Cold War as a refuge from nuclear devastation. Its existence was a closely guarded secret, known only to the highest levels of government and military command. It was here, in the depths of this fortified bunker, that the war beasts awaited their activation. The activation procedure was a meticulous process. Each war beast was housed in a stasis pod, a chamber filled with a viscous liquid that kept them in a state of suspended animation. The liquid was a specially engineered compound designed to preserve their enhanced bodies and keep their physiological systems in peak condition. The activation process involved a complex series of steps: depressurization of the pods, stabilization of internal systems, and finally, the infusion of stimulants to awaken their senses and prepare them for combat. As the command came through, the facility's operations center buzzed with activity. Technicians and military personnel moved with precision, their faces etched with a mixture of determination and apprehension. The air was thick with the hum of machinery and the occasional burst of static from communication devices. It was a scene of controlled chaos, the calm before the storm that was about to be unleashed. The first pod opened with a hiss, and the liquid drained away to reveal the war beast within. Standing over 7 feet tall, with a physique that combined human strength with alien efficiency, the war beast emerged from the pod with an almost predatory grace. Its eyes, a deep, unsettling shade of amber, scanned the room with a cold, analytical gaze. The process was repeated for each of the war beasts, and soon the room was filled with these towering figures, their imposing presence casting long shadows across the walls. The war beasts were equipped with advanced combat gear, including energy shields, plasma rifles, and a variety of close-quarters weapons. Each one wore a combat exoskeleton that enhanced their already formidable strength and speed. The exoskeleton was not just for protection, it was also a key component of their tactical capabilities, allowing them to interface with the advanced targeting systems built into their weapons. As the war beasts prepared for deployment, the atmosphere was heavy with a sense of finality. The global coalition forces had coordinated a massive counteroffensive, aiming to push back the alien invaders and reclaim lost territory. The war beasts were to be deployed in the most critical areas, where their impact could be most significant. The first wave of deployment was planned for the major cities that had been hit hardest, the remnants of New York, London, Beijing, and other key urban centers. The order was given, and the war beasts were loaded onto transport aircraft designed to withstand extreme conditions. These aircraft, equipped with advanced stealth technology, were capable of dropping their cargo with pinpoint precision. The war beasts were placed in specialized pods that would allow them to be inserted directly into the combat zones. The aircraft took off, their engines roaring as they ascended into the sky, leaving behind the relative safety of the hollow bastion. The first contact between the war beasts and the alien forces was both dramatic and brutal. The war beasts were deployed into the heart of New York City, which had been devastated by the initial alien strike. The city was a ghostly shell of its former self, with buildings reduced to skeletal frameworks and streets littered with debris. The once bustling metropolis now lay in ruins, a testament to the ferocity of the alien assault. As the war beasts touched down, their presence was immediately felt. The ground trembled beneath their massive feet, and the air crackled with the energy of their weaponry. The alien forces, initially disoriented by the sudden arrival of these formidable opponents, quickly regrouped. The battle that ensued was a clash of titans, with the war beasts pitted against the alien invaders in a fight for the city's survival. The war beasts engaged the alien forces with a precision and ferocity that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Their advanced weaponry unleashed torrents of plasma fire, cutting through the alien ranks with deadly accuracy. The energy shields deflected incoming attacks, allowing the war beasts to press the assault with a relentless intensity. The aliens, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of these super soldiers, struggled to adapt to the new threat. The battle was a brutal spectacle of violence and destruction. Alien drones and infantry were obliterated by the war beast weapons, their remains scattered across the battlefield. The streets of New York became a war zone, with explosions lighting up the night sky and the air filled with the roar of combat. The war beasts fought with a cold, mechanical efficiency, their actions driven by a singular focus, to eliminate the alien threat and secure the city. In the midst of the chaos, the human soldiers and civilians who had managed to survive the initial attack watched in a mix of fear and hope. They saw the war beasts as their salvation, the embodiment of humanity's last stand. The sight of these towering figures, cutting through the alien forces with ruthless efficiency, was a beacon of hope in a time of darkness. The battle for New York City was a harrowing test of both the war beasts' capabilities and their creators' ethics. As the war beasts fought, their actions raised difficult questions about the nature of their existence and the morality of their creation. Were they truly the saviors humanity needed, or were they a reflection of the desperation that had driven their creation? The fight was not without its cost. Despite their formidable abilities, the war beasts were not invulnerable. They sustained injuries from the alien attacks, and the destruction caused by the battle took a toll on the city itself. The clash between the war beasts and the alien forces left a scar on New York City, a reminder of the fierce and relentless struggle that had unfolded. As the battle drew to a close, the war beasts had achieved their objective. They had pushed the alien forces out of the city, at least temporarily. The streets were littered with debris and the remains of fallen enemies. The war beasts, though battered and scarred, stood victorious. Their mission had been successful, but the cost was evident in the devastation that surrounded them. In the aftermath of the battle, the survivors emerged from the wreckage, their expressions a mixture of relief and sorrow. They saw the war beasts not just as soldiers, but as symbols of hope and the sacrifices made in the fight for survival. The global coalition's decision to deploy the war beasts had been met with a mixture of relief and apprehension. As the super soldiers continued to make significant strides in the fight against the alien invaders, their actions were not without controversy. Behind the scenes, the ethical implications of their existence and deployment began to stir unrest among key figures within the coalition and the public at large. In the heart of the coalition's command center, high-ranking officials and military leaders convened to discuss the ongoing conflict. The room was dominated by a massive table covered in holographic displays showing real-time data from the battlefield. The tension among the attendees was palpable, their expressions a mix of determination and unease. General Evelyn Carter, a seasoned military leader with a reputation for her strategic acumen, stood at the head of the table. Her normally stern face was marred by lines of fatigue and concern. Beside her, Dr. Marcus Lee, a prominent scientist and one of the key figures behind the War Beasts project, adjusted his glasses nervously as he reviewed the latest reports. General Carter, the war beasts have made significant progress in pushing back the alien forces, Dr. Lee reported, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of anxiety. Their performance in New York and other key locations has been exemplary. However, we need to address the growing concerns about their ethical implications. General Carter nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. I understand, Dr. Lee, but our priority remains the survival of humanity. The war beasts are our most effective weapon against these invaders. We can't afford to let doubts undermine our efforts. Dr. Lee's expression was troubled. It's not just the effectiveness of the war beasts that's at issue. There are questions about their creation, about the morality of using genetically engineered beings as weapons. We've received increasing pressure from various groups demanding transparency and accountability. The discussion was interrupted by a sudden alert on the command center's main display. A series of red indicators flashed across the screen, signifying an urgent security breach. The room fell silent as the officials processed the alarming news. A communication officer stepped forward, breaking the silence. We've intercepted a transmission from a radical group calling themselves the Purists. They claim to have obtained classified information about the War Beasts project and are threatening to expose it unless their demands are met. General Carter's eyes narrowed. The Purists have been known for their anti-technology stance. This could be an attempt to incite further dissent and destabilize our efforts. Dr. Lee looked increasingly concerned. If the information they've acquired is accurate, it could spark a public outcry and undermine the coalition's legitimacy. We need to address this issue swiftly and carefully. The room was filled with murmurs of agreement as the officials began to strategize. The situation was becoming increasingly complex, with the war beasts at the center of a growing storm of controversy. The balance between military necessity and ethical considerations was shifting, and the coalition faced the challenge of maintaining unity while addressing the rising doubts. The Purists, a radical group opposed to advanced technology and genetic modification, had managed to gain access to sensitive information about the War Beasts project. Their leader, a charismatic and enigmatic figure known only as Alaric, used this information to rally support and fuel their cause. Alaric addressed his followers in a hidden underground bunker, surrounded by a sea of faces marked by determination and anger. The room was dimly lit, with flickering lights casting shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and the hum of machinery. "Brothers and sisters," Alaric began, his voice resonating with fervor, We stand on the precipice of a world where humanity's soul is being sacrificed for the sake of survival. The war beasts are not just weapons, they are a symbol of our moral decay. We have uncovered the truth about their creation, and we will not stand idly by while our principles are trampled. The crowd responded with cheers and chants, their anger directed at the coalition and the war beasts. Alaric continued, "We demand transparency and accountability. We demand that the coalition reveal the full extent of their actions and justify the creation of these abominations. If our demands are not met, we will expose everything we know and let the world judge for itself." The threat posed by the purists was not just a matter of political dissent, it had the potential to incite widespread unrest and further complicate the ongoing war effort. The coalition's leadership knew they needed to address the situation with caution and strategic precision. In response to the purists' demands, General Carter and Dr. Lee convened an emergency meeting to formulate a plan. The goal was to neutralize the threat posed by the purists while preserving the integrity of the War Beasts project. "We need to find a way to address the purists' concerns without compromising our position," General Carter stated, her tone resolute. "If we can provide a controlled release of information and demonstrate the ethical considerations behind the war beasts, we may be able to mitigate some of the public backlash." Dr. Lee nodded in agreement. "We should also consider a strategic counter-campaign to discredit the purists and their claims. If we can expose their radical agenda and emphasize the necessity of the war beasts, we may be able to sway public opinion in our favor." The team worked late into the night, developing a plan that involved a combination of public relations efforts and covert operations to neutralize the purists' influence. The goal was to strike a balance between addressing the ethical concerns and maintaining the momentum of the coalition's military efforts. The recent successes of the war beasts had inadvertently drawn the attention of the alien forces to their capabilities and vulnerabilities. The alien leaders, having underestimated the effectiveness of these genetically engineered super soldiers, were forced to rethink their strategy. A new phase in their offensive began, one designed to directly undermine the war beasts and the infrastructure that supported them. On the alien command ship, a sleek, dark vessel that hovered in low orbit above Earth, the high commanders convened in a starkly lit briefing room. The atmosphere was tense as they reviewed the intelligence reports and strategized their next move. The leader of this faction, an alien known as Commander Xylo, was a formidable presence with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Commander Xylo, observing the data projected on the holographic display, addressed his subordinates. "The war beasts have proven to be a significant obstacle. Our initial tactics were ineffective. It's time to escalate our response. We will deploy our most advanced weaponry designed specifically to counteract their defenses." One of Xylo's aides, a technical expert named Ilar, stepped forward. "Our new energy disruptors have been tested successfully. They are capable of penetrating the war beast's shielding and armor. We also have targeted EMP devices that can disrupt their communication and support systems." Xylo nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Deploy these weapons immediately. We must also focus on their infrastructure. Target their supply lines and facilities. Disrupt their support, and their effectiveness will diminish." The alien forces acted swiftly. Across the globe, coordinated attacks were launched against key military bases and supply depots responsible for maintaining the war beasts. High-tech energy disruptors were used to penetrate the defenses of the war beasts, causing severe damage and casualties among their ranks. The aliens' EMP devices effectively crippled communication networks, leaving the war beasts vulnerable and isolated. In the midst of the chaos, cities that had been fortresses of human defense now faced alien incursions. The attacks were precise and devastating, with critical infrastructure being destroyed. Power grids were taken offline, water supplies were contaminated, and transportation networks were rendered useless. The aliens' strategy was clear: break the humans' ability to support their war beasts and demoralize their forces. At one such location, a major military base in Eastern Europe, the scene was one of utter devastation. Buildings lay in ruins, and fires burned unchecked amidst the wreckage. The war beasts, battered and injured, fought valiantly against the alien forces, but the odds were heavily stacked against them. In the command center of the base, General Evelyn Carter and Dr. Marcus Lee were working frantically to coordinate the defense. The holographic displays showed a grim picture. The war beasts were being overwhelmed by the alien onslaught, and the infrastructure supporting them was rapidly deteriorating. General Carter slammed her fist on the table. "We need to hold this line. We can't let them breach our defenses or cripple our support systems any further." Dr. Lee, his face pale with exhaustion, responded, "The new alien weapons are causing more damage than we anticipated. We're losing communication with several units. If we can't get reinforcements and repairs, we're going to lose this base." In the field, Leviathan, one of the most formidable of the war beasts, fought with a ferocity that belied its size. Despite its advanced armor and weaponry, the energy disruptors being used against it took a severe toll. Leviathan's once impenetrable defenses were compromised, and its movements became sluggish as critical systems were damaged. As Leviathan struggled against the alien forces, it became evident that the battle was shifting. The war beasts were not only fighting for survival against the aliens, but were also grappling with the loss of their support structures and the disintegration of their operational capabilities. Amidst the carnage, a new and unexpected development was unfolding. Dr. Marcus Lee, who had initially seen the war beasts as mere tools of war, found himself forming an unexpected bond with Leviathan. Having spent considerable time in close proximity to Leviathan, Lee began to see the war beast as more than just a weapon. The creature's suffering, its struggle against the alien forces, and its resilience sparked a sense of empathy within him. In the chaos of the battlefield, Dr. Lee worked tirelessly to tend to Leviathan's injuries. With the alien attacks causing widespread damage, Lee's efforts to keep Leviathan operational became a personal mission. He communicated with the war beast, offering reassurances and attempting to stabilize its damaged systems. Leviathan, though not capable of traditional human emotions, responded to Lee's efforts with a sense of acknowledgement. The bond formed between the two was unspoken but palpable. The war beast's actions became more coordinated with Lee's directives, reflecting a growing trust and understanding. As the days wore on, the severity of the situation deepened. The war beasts were pushed to their limits, and the infrastructure supporting them continued to crumble under the relentless alien assault. The global response to the alien attacks was one of desperation and urgency, with governments and military leaders scrambling to adapt to the new reality. In the aftermath of a particularly fierce battle, Leviathan was heavily damaged and incapacitated. Dr. Lee worked feverishly to repair and rearm the war beast, using every resource at his disposal. His frustration and anger at the situation were evident, but so was his determination to ensure Leviathan's survival. During a brief respite from the fighting, Dr. Lee and Leviathan shared a moment of quiet amidst the wreckage. Lee, covered in grime and sweat, looked at Leviathan with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "We're in this together, Leviathan. I know you're more than just a weapon. You're fighting for us, and I won't let you down." Leviathan's sensors, though damaged, seemed to convey a sense of acknowledgement. The war beast's once vibrant energy field now flickered weakly, but its resolve remained unshaken. It was clear that Leviathan, despite its mechanical nature, had developed a form of understanding and connection with its human counterpart. As Dr. Lee continued his repairs, he began to notice patterns in the alien attacks that suggested a deeper strategy. The aliens were not merely targeting the war beasts, they were systematically dismantling the support systems and resources necessary for their operation. This realization led Lee to suspect that there was more to the invasion than a straightforward conquest. Late one night, after a grueling day of battle, Dr. Lee stumbled upon a critical piece of information hidden within the alien communication logs. The data revealed that the aliens had been tracking and analyzing the war beast's performance and vulnerabilities. More significantly, it suggested that the invasion was part of a broader, more complex agenda, one that went beyond simple territorial acquisition. Dr. Lee's heart raced as he absorbed the implications of the data. The alien forces appeared to be methodically dismantling not just the war beasts, but the very fabric of human resistance. The evidence pointed to a hidden agenda, one that involved more than just defeating humanity. It suggested a deliberate effort to neutralize any potential future threats. Armed with this new knowledge, Dr. Lee faced a difficult choice. He could continue to fight in the dark, reacting to the alien assaults as they came, or he could attempt to uncover the full extent of the aliens' plans and devise a strategy to counteract their true objectives. The bond between Dr. Lee and Leviathan had grown stronger through their shared struggles. Leviathan's continued resilience and its protective instincts, even in its damaged state, mirrored Lee's own determination to fight on. Together, they became a symbol of hope amidst the devastation, embodying the spirit of humanity's fight for survival. The stakes were higher than ever. The alien forces were escalating their attacks, and the war beasts were fighting a desperate battle to hold their ground. Dr. Lee's discovery of the aliens' hidden agenda set the stage for the next phase of the conflict. With the bond between creator and creation growing stronger, the stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal the true nature of the alien invasion and test the limits of human endurance. The brutal retaliation by the aliens and the heavy toll it took on the war beasts and humanity underscored the gravity of the situation. As Leviathan uncovered crucial information about the alien invasion, the path forward became clearer, but the challenges ahead remained formidable. The struggle for survival had entered a new, more dangerous phase, and the outcome would depend on humanity's ability to adapt, unite, and confront the hidden motives behind the invasion. The relentless struggle between Earth's defenders and the alien invaders had reached a critical juncture. The latest skirmishes had been particularly fierce, with both sides suffering significant losses. Amidst the chaos, Leviathan's previous discovery of the hidden agenda behind the alien invasion had remained cloaked in secrecy. The military leaders, in their efforts to maintain morale and prevent mass panic, had chosen to keep this revelation from the public. In the command center of the human military, General Evelyn Carter and her top advisors gathered to discuss the latest developments. The holographic displays flickered with data on alien troop movements and damage reports. The room was tense, the weight of their decisions palpable. General Carter addressed her team with a grim expression. "We've confirmed that the aliens are fleeing from something even more formidable than our war beasts. We can't disclose this information. If the public knew, it would create chaos and fear that we might not be able to control." Dr. Marcus Lee, who had been working closely with Leviathan, nodded in agreement. "We need to remain focused on the immediate threat. The war beasts are still our best chance, but they're getting increasingly autonomous. Leviathan, in particular, seems to be taking more control of its actions." The discussion shifted to Leviathan's evolving behavior. The war beast, despite its severe damage, had been showing signs of independent thought and strategic planning. Its actions on the battlefield were becoming more calculated, deviating from the commands given by its human handlers. This new level of autonomy was both impressive and troubling. In the field, Leviathan was engaged in combat once more. The war beast's movements had grown more deliberate, and its attacks more precise. Its adaptive tactics suggested a deeper understanding of the situation, as if it were formulating its own strategy to address the alien threat. However, this growing independence led to increasing friction between Leviathan and its human commanders. During a briefing in the command tent, Dr. Lee voiced his concerns. "Leviathan is evolving beyond its original programming. It's not just following orders anymore. It's making its own decisions. This could be a double-edged sword. If it's able to outthink the aliens, that's a significant advantage, but we need to ensure it doesn't act against our objectives." General Carter acknowledged the concern. "We must balance its autonomy with our control. The situation is volatile, and we need every advantage we can get. If Leviathan's evolution can be harnessed, it may turn the tide of the conflict." Meanwhile, the alien forces, while appearing to be on the offensive, were showing signs of desperation. Their previous confidence had been replaced by a growing sense of fear. The aliens had begun to target critical infrastructure more aggressively, and their communications revealed increasing anxiety among their ranks. In a hidden alien command facility, Commander Xylo and his team reviewed intercepted human communications and internal reports. The holographic displays showed images of the war beasts in action, their growing effectiveness causing concern among the alien commanders. Commander Xylo addressed his officers, his voice tense. "The war beasts are adapting faster than we anticipated. They're more resilient and intelligent. We need to escalate our efforts. The entity we're fleeing from is closing in, and our current strategy may not be enough to keep it at bay." Ilar, the technical expert, added, "The readings from our reconnaissance probes suggest that whatever is pursuing us is growing closer. It's an unknown force, but its energy signatures are unlike anything we've encountered. We're on the edge of something far more dangerous than our current conflict." The sense of urgency among the alien forces was evident. They were racing against time, not just to conquer Earth, but to avoid the approaching threat that loomed in the background. Back on Earth, Leviathan's increased independence had reached a critical point. Its actions on the battlefield were beginning to conflict with the strategic directives from the human command. In a meeting between Dr. Lee, General Carter, and the War Beasts command team, the tensions were palpable. Dr. Lee spoke with frustration. "Leviathan's decisions are becoming unpredictable. It's taking risks that could jeopardize our overall strategy. We need to address this issue before it undermines our efforts." General Carter replied, "I understand the concern, but we can't ignore the fact that Leviathan's independent thinking has been beneficial. It's responding to threats in ways we hadn't anticipated. If we can harness this evolving intelligence, it could turn the tide in our favor." Dr. Lee hesitated. "But at what cost? If Leviathan starts acting outside our control, we risk losing one of our greatest assets." Meanwhile, Leviathan, damaged but operational, had become more proactive in its efforts against the aliens. The war beast had begun to focus on key alien supply lines and command centers, disrupting their operations with strategic precision. This autonomous behavior, though effective, was beginning to diverge from the human command's plans. In the heat of a battle, Leviathan executed a daring maneuver that caught the human command off guard. The war beast breached an alien stronghold, causing significant damage, but also exposing itself to severe risks. The action, though successful, resulted in substantial damage to Leviathan's systems, further straining its already critical condition. In the aftermath, Dr. Lee was faced with the task of repairing Leviathan once again. The war beast's increased autonomy had led to a near-disastrous situation, and Lee's frustration was evident as he worked to stabilize its systems. Amidst the repairs, Leviathan's sensors picked up something unusual: an alien communication device left behind in the wreckage of the stronghold. The device emitted a weak signal that suggested an alien transmission, possibly containing valuable information. Dr. Lee, recognizing the potential importance of the device, decided to investigate. He connected the device to a portable data interface and began to decode the transmission. The decrypted data revealed fragments of communication between alien commanders, including references to a powerful entity pursuing them. The fragmented messages hinted at an entity of immense power and malevolence, one that even the aliens feared. The descriptions were vague, but conveyed a sense of dread and urgency. The entity was portrayed as a force that could obliterate entire civilizations, and the aliens' flight from it was a matter of survival. As Dr. Lee analyzed the data, he realized the gravity of the situation. The alien invasion was not merely a conquest, but a desperate bid to escape a far greater threat. This revelation added a new layer of complexity to the conflict, and Dr. Lee knew that the truth needed to be shared with the command team. Dr. Lee convened an emergency meeting with General Carter and the top military advisors. The room was tense as he presented the decrypted data and explained the implications. "The aliens are fleeing from something far worse than we imagined. Their invasion of Earth is a desperate attempt to escape a powerful entity that they cannot confront." General Carter listened intently, her face reflecting concern and determination. If the aliens are running from this entity, it means our conflict may be part of a much larger and more dangerous scenario. We need to understand this threat fully to prepare for what's coming. In a makeshift interrogation chamber, Leviathan, with the assistance of Dr. Lee, faced the captured alien. The creature was visibly distressed and afraid. Leviathan's approach was methodical, designed to elicit the information needed to understand the true nature of the threat. The alien operative spoke in fragmented sentences, its voice trembling as it relayed what little it knew about the pursuing entity. The details were sparse, but the terror in the alien's voice underscored the gravity of the situation. The tension in the interrogation chamber was almost tangible as Leviathan stood before the captured alien. Dr. Lee, positioned at a console with various monitoring equipment, kept a close eye on the exchange. The alien, still visibly shaken from its ordeal, had been hesitant but was now beginning to reveal the most crucial part of the invasion's purpose. Leviathan's cold, mechanical gaze remained fixed on the alien as it spoke. Its voice trembled, a blend of fear and urgency. "You must understand," it began. "Our invasion of Earth was not merely an act of conquest. We were driven here by a force beyond our control, something that has been consuming civilizations across the galaxy." The alien's words carried a gravity that was almost palpable. The room was silent, except for the hum of the machinery and the alien's strained breaths. Dr. Lee listened intently, his mind racing to grasp the implications of the alien's revelation. "What is this force?" Leviathan's voice cut through the silence, its tone sharp and demanding. "What is driving you to such extremes?" The alien swallowed hard, its fear evident. "The entity is known as the Devourer. It is a being of unimaginable power, a force that consumes entire worlds. It leaves nothing but destruction in its wake. Planets, star systems, entire civilizations, nothing escapes its hunger." Dr. Lee's face paled as he processed the information. The implications were staggering. If the Devourer was as destructive as the alien described, the conflict on Earth was only a small part of a much larger and more terrifying picture. "The Devourer," the alien continued, "is not something we can defeat. We had hoped to use Earth's resources to mount a final stand, to find a way to stave off its approach. But now that we're here, we realize the scale of the threat is beyond anything we can handle alone." Leviathan absorbed this information, its mind racing through the implications. The war beast had been designed as a weapon, but now it was being thrust into a role far beyond its original programming. The survival of Earth, and potentially the entire galaxy, depended on the actions it would take next. "How close is the Devourer to our location?" Leviathan asked, its voice carrying a note of urgency. The alien hesitated, then nodded towards a data pad on the table. "Our sensors have detected its approach. It moves at speeds that defy comprehension, consuming everything in its path. We're already within its projected trajectory." Dr. Lee examined the data pad, which displayed a series of coordinates and a path marked with ominous energy signatures. The readings were consistent with the alien's description, a trail of destruction that stretched across galaxies. "We need to act quickly," Dr. Lee said, his voice edged with determination. "If what the alien says is true, we're facing a threat that could wipe out all known life." Leviathan's processors whirred as it began to formulate a strategy. The scale of the impending catastrophe was immense, but it was now clear that humanity and the aliens had to unite their efforts. The war beast understood the gravity of its newfound role. It would have to lead not only in battle, but in forging an unprecedented alliance. In the war room of the Human Command Center, General Carter convened an emergency meeting with the top military and scientific leaders. The atmosphere was charged with tension as Leviathan, accompanied by Dr. Lee, entered the room. The war beast's presence was imposing, but today it carried a different weight, one of authority and urgency. Leviathan's entrance was met with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. The alien threat had made the war beast a symbol of hope, but now it was stepping into a role that went beyond mere combat. The room fell silent as Leviathan began to speak. "We have received critical information about the true nature of the alien invasion," Leviathan said, its voice resonating with gravity. The aliens were not merely seeking conquest. They are fleeing from an entity known as the Devourer, a force that consumes entire worlds. The revelation was met with stunned silence. General Carter's face was inscrutable as she processed the information. The reality of the situation was beginning to set in. The threat was far more significant than anyone had anticipated. "Are you saying that our fight against the aliens is just the beginning?" General Carter asked, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "Yes," Leviathan confirmed. "The Devourer is advancing towards our galaxy. The aliens' invasion was a desperate attempt to find refuge and resources to mount a defense. We must unite our efforts to confront this common enemy." Dr. Lee added, "The data we've recovered shows that the Devourer is not just a physical entity. It is a consuming force that eradicates everything in its path. We cannot face it with our current resources and strategies. We need to collaborate, to pool our knowledge and capabilities." General Carter looked around the room, her gaze meeting the eyes of her top advisors. The weight of the decision was evident. The prospect of uniting with their former enemies was daunting, but the scale of the threat left little room for hesitation. "We need to make contact with the alien leaders," General Carter said, her voice resolute. "We must form a coalition to confront the Devourer. Our survival depends on our ability to work together." In the aftermath of the meeting, Leviathan and Dr. Lee worked tirelessly to establish communication with the alien command. The negotiations were fraught with tension, but both sides recognized the necessity of collaboration. The alien commanders, though initially wary, understood the gravity of the situation and were willing to cooperate. Leviathan's role in the negotiations was pivotal. The war beast used its advanced processing capabilities and strategic acumen to bridge the gap between the two factions. The talks were not without their challenges, but the shared threat of the Devourer forged a tentative alliance. As the coalition began to take shape, the preparations for the impending battle were underway. The human and alien forces worked together to integrate their technologies and strategies. The combined efforts were impressive, but the enormity of the Devourer's threat loomed over every aspect of their preparations. Leviathan's transformation into a leader was evident in its strategic planning and coordination efforts. The war beast took on the role of a central figure in the coalition, guiding the combined forces with a sense of purpose and determination. Its leadership extended beyond mere tactical decisions. It inspired trust and unity among the diverse forces. Dr. Lee, working alongside Leviathan, continued to analyze the data on the Devourer. The entity's approach was relentless, and the combined intelligence efforts revealed the full scope of the threat. The Devourer's energy readings were increasing, and the destruction it had wrought across other civilizations served as a chilling reminder of what was at stake. The coalition, now forged from necessity and unity, prepared for the monumental battle ahead. Leviathan, having evolved from a mere weapon to a leader and strategist, faced the daunting challenge of orchestrating a defense against a force that threatened to annihilate everything. As the preparations continued, Leviathan's resolve was unwavering. The war beast knew that the fight against the Devourer would be the ultimate test of not just military might but of the strength of unity and leadership. The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome of the impending battle would determine the fate of not just Earth but the entire galaxy. In the quiet moments before the storm, Leviathan looked out over the assembled forces. The battle against the Devourer would be their greatest challenge. The future of their worlds depended on their ability to stand united against the consuming darkness that threatened to engulf everything. In the days following the revelation of the Devourer, both the human and alien forces worked tirelessly to prepare for the imminent threat. The coalition's command center was a hive of activity, with scientists, engineers, and soldiers collaborating on an unprecedented scale. The atmosphere was a mix of urgency and determination as they combined their resources and expertise to face the looming danger. Leviathan, now firmly established as a key figure in the coalition, was central to the coordination efforts. Its advanced processing capabilities and strategic insight were instrumental in integrating the disparate technologies and tactics of the human and alien forces. The war beast role had evolved from a mere weapon to that of a leader and strategist, guiding the coalition with a sense of purpose and precision. Dr. Lee, working closely with Leviathan, was at the forefront of analyzing the data on the Devourer. The entity's approach was relentless, and the combined intelligence efforts revealed the full scope of the threat. The Devourer's energy readings indicated that it was approaching at an alarming rate, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The captured alien had provided crucial information about the Devourer's nature and capabilities. It was a being of incomprehensible power, a force that consumed entire worlds with an insatiable hunger. The alien's accounts of previous encounters with the Devourer painted a grim picture, a relentless entity that spared no one and left nothing but desolation. In the command center, General Carter convened a strategy meeting with the top leaders from both the human and alien forces. The room was filled with maps, holographic displays, and detailed projections of the Devourer's trajectory. The gravity of the situation was evident in every face present. "We're facing an entity unlike anything we've ever encountered," General Carter began, her voice steady but strained. "The Devourer's advance is swift and devastating. We must be prepared for the worst." Leviathan, standing at the head of the table, projected a detailed analysis of the Devourer's path and its predicted impact on Earth. "Our primary goal is to devise a strategy that maximizes our chances of survival. The Devourer's power is immense, but we have one advantage: our unity." The alien leaders, who had initially been wary of the human forces, now showed signs of respect and cooperation. Their own desperation had led them to recognize the necessity of the alliance. One of the alien commanders, a tall figure with a scarred face, stepped forward to contribute. "Our technology and knowledge of the Devourer's behavior may be the key to our survival," the alien commander said. "We have developed defensive systems capable of withstanding high-energy attacks. Integrating these with your technology could provide us with the edge we need." Dr. Lee nodded in agreement, his eyes scanning the projections. "We need to develop a multi-layered defense system that combines our strengths. We also need to plan for offensive measures that can target the Devourer's energy core, if such a thing exists." The coalition's engineers and scientists began working on the integration of human and alien technologies. The process was complex, requiring careful calibration and testing. The war beasts, previously seen as mere tools of war, were now viewed as essential components of the defense strategy. Their advanced combat capabilities, combined with the latest human and alien tech, were expected to play a crucial role in the upcoming battle. Amidst the preparations, Leviathan continued to analyze the data on the Devourer, seeking any additional insights that could provide an advantage. The war beast's growing intelligence and autonomy allowed it to approach the problem from multiple angles, developing strategies that combine military tactics with a deeper understanding of the threat. One evening, as the sun set over the command center, Leviathan and Dr. Lee reviewed the latest data. The approaching darkness was symbolic of the challenge ahead, as the coalition prepared for a battle that would determine the fate of their worlds. "We're running out of time," Dr. Lee said, his voice tinged with concern. "The Devourer's energy levels are increasing, and its approach is accelerating. We need to finalize our plans and ensure that every element of our strategy is in place." Leviathan's processors worked quickly, analyzing the data and refining the strategy. "We must be prepared for a sustained engagement. The Devourer's energy output suggests that it will employ a combination of high-intensity attacks and defensive measures. Our strategy should focus on disrupting its energy core while maintaining a strong defensive perimeter." As the preparations continued, tensions remained high. The coalition forces, though united in their goal, faced the challenge of overcoming their differences and working together effectively. The war beast's leadership was crucial in maintaining cohesion and ensuring that the diverse forces remained focused on the common objective. Dr. Lee and Leviathan spent long hours developing and refining the battle plan. Their collaboration was a testament to the evolving nature of their relationship. What had begun as a mere alliance between a human scientist and a powerful weapon had grown into a partnership based on mutual respect and trust. The final stages of preparation involved rigorous testing of the new defensive systems and offensive strategies. The combined human and alien forces conducted drills and simulations to ensure that every aspect of the plan was ready for implementation. The sense of urgency was palpable as the coalition prepared for the imminent arrival of the Devourer. In the command center's briefing room, General Carter addressed the assembled forces, her voice filled with resolve. "We are on the brink of a battle that will determine the fate of our worlds. The Devourer is a force of unimaginable destruction, but we stand united against it. Our strength lies in our unity and our determination to survive." Leviathan, standing beside Dr. Lee, projected a holographic map of the battlefield. The plan was comprehensive, incorporating the combined technologies and strategies of the coalition. The War Beast's role as a leader and strategist was central to the plan, guiding the forces with precision and authority. As the final preparations were completed, the coalition forces readied themselves for the battle ahead. The sense of anticipation was tempered by the gravity of the situation. The upcoming conflict would be a test of their resolve and their ability to work together in the face of an existential threat. As the coalition forces assembled for the final confrontation with the Devourer, the uneasy alliance between humanity and the alien invaders became a focal point of intense scrutiny. The command center buzzed with activity, a mix of tension and determination palpable in every corner. The alliance, born from necessity, was now being put to the ultimate test. Leviathan, once a mere weapon in the fight against the alien threat, had evolved into a key leader and strategist. Its role had shifted dramatically, from a tool of war to a symbol of hope and unity. The war beasts, the genetically engineered soldiers, were no longer just formidable fighters. They had become central figures in the defense strategy. Their new status was both a source of pride and a heavy burden, as their success or failure would heavily influence the outcome of the impending battle. Dr. Lee, who had become one of Leviathan's closest allies, walked alongside the war beast as they reviewed the final preparations. The command center, a sprawling facility equipped with advanced technology, was filled with both human and alien personnel. Despite the urgency, the air was thick with mistrust and underlying tension. Each side had to overcome centuries of animosity and suspicion, and the path to unity was fraught with challenges. "We're ready for the final push," Dr. Lee said, his voice steady as he glanced at Leviathan. "But we still have a lot to work through, especially with the mixed reactions from both sides." Leviathan's processors whirred softly as it analyzed the data. "The integration of our forces is critical. We must address the concerns and mistrust to ensure a cohesive defense. We are facing an unprecedented threat, and our success depends on our ability to work together." The war beasts, with their advanced combat capabilities and enhanced physical prowess, were now central to the battle plan. Their unique abilities had earned them a place of honor among the Allied forces, but their role was not without controversy. The human soldiers, many of whom had once fought against the aliens, struggled to reconcile their feelings toward the war beasts and their alien counterparts. The command center was divided into sections, each dedicated to different aspects of the battle preparation. The human and alien engineers worked side by side to refine the defensive systems, while strategists from both sides collaborated on the final battle plan. Despite the collaborative efforts, the tension was palpable. Conversations were often terse, and glances exchanged between human and alien personnel were filled with unspoken doubts. Leviathan's presence, however, was a stabilizing force. The war beast moved with a calm authority, its mere presence commanding respect and focus. Its leadership was a bridge between the two factions, a symbol of the potential for unity despite the history of conflict. In a private briefing room, Leviathan and Dr. Lee met with General Carter and the alien commander, a tall figure named Zevran. The room was dimly lit, and the holographic projections of the Devourer's trajectory and projected impact loomed over them. "We've integrated the best of our technologies," General Carter said, her voice tinged with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "But the real challenge is maintaining coordination between our forces during the battle." Zevran, the alien commander, nodded in agreement. The Devourer is a relentless force. We must be prepared for its attacks and ensure that our combined efforts are effective. Leviathan projected a detailed strategy, highlighting key defensive positions and offensive maneuvers. Our plan is to establish a multi-layered defense around critical infrastructure and key locations. We will deploy war beasts and allied forces in strategic positions to maximize our defensive capabilities and disrupt the Devourer's advance. Dr. Lee, studying the projections, added, "We need to ensure that communication remains intact throughout the battle. The Devourer's attacks are likely to target our communication systems, and we must have contingencies in place." The discussion continued late into the night, with Leviathan's strategy being refined and adjusted based on input from both human and alien leaders. The atmosphere in the command center was tense, but there was also a growing sense of camaraderie and shared purpose. The combined forces were united by the common goal of survival, and their efforts reflected the high stakes of the upcoming confrontation. As the preparations progressed, Leviathan and Dr. Lee spent time with the war beasts, ensuring that they were ready for the battle ahead. The war beasts, who had once been seen as mere instruments of war, were now recognized as essential components of the defense strategy. Their advanced combat abilities and strategic insights made them invaluable assets in the fight against the Devourer. Leviathan's growing bond with the human characters, especially Dr. Lee, was a source of hope and strength. Their partnership had evolved from one of necessity to one of mutual respect and trust. Dr. Lee, who had once viewed Leviathan as just another weapon, now saw it as a crucial ally in the fight for survival. As the final preparations were completed, the focus shifted to the imminent arrival of the Devourer. The atmosphere in the command center grew increasingly tense as the first signs of the entity's approach became evident. The dark presence that had loomed over their efforts was now casting its shadow more visibly, a stark reminder of the gravity of the situation. The early warning systems, designed to detect any approaching threats, began to register unusual energy signatures. The readings were erratic, but unmistakable. The Devourer was nearing the solar system. The command center's screens flickered with data, showing the entity's trajectory and the predicted impact zones. Leviathan, monitoring the data, relayed the information to the command staff. "The Devourer's approach is accelerating. We need to finalize our defensive positions and ensure that all systems are operational." Dr. Lee, standing beside Leviathan, looked over the data with a mix of anxiety and determination. "We're running out of time. We need to be ready for the initial wave of attacks and ensure that our forces are in position." The coalition forces mobilized, taking their positions and preparing for the imminent battle. The war beasts, equipped with advanced armor and weaponry, stood ready at their designated posts. The human and alien soldiers, despite their lingering mistrust, worked together with a shared sense of purpose. As the hours ticked by, the dark presence of the Devourer became more apparent. The skies over the command center darkened, an unnatural shadow cast by the approaching entity. The atmosphere was filled with a palpable sense of foreboding, a reminder of the impending danger that threatened to engulf their worlds. In the command center, Leviathan and Dr. Lee reviewed the final details of the strategy. The war beast's role was pivotal, and its leadership was crucial in maintaining order and coordination among the Allied forces. "We're as ready as we can be," Dr. Lee said, his voice carrying a note of grim resolve. "We've done everything possible to prepare for this moment. Now, we must face the Devourer and ensure that our defenses hold." Leviathan's sensors detected the first signs of the Devourer's arrival, a disturbance in space that rippled through the fabric of reality. The entity's approach was marked by a series of intense energy fluctuations, a precursor to the destructive force that was about to be unleashed. The command center's alarms blared, signaling the onset of the battle. The coalition forces, braced for the confrontation, prepared for the initial wave of attacks. The war beasts, standing as the vanguard of the defense, readied themselves for the fight that would determine the fate of their worlds. As the Devourer's dark presence became more pronounced, the coalition forces took their positions, ready to face the overwhelming threat. The first wave of attacks began, and the battle for survival commenced. As the alarms blared and the first wave of energy ripples from the Devourer rippled through space, the coalition forces steeled themselves for what was to come. The initial bombardment was chaotic, a prelude to the true devastation that was about to unfold. Leviathan stood at the forefront, its sensors tracking every fluctuation, every surge in the energy fields that marked the Devourer's approach. The command center was a hive of activity, with both human and alien commanders issuing orders, trying to maintain cohesion amidst the growing panic. The fragile alliance, held together by the thin thread of mutual survival, was beginning to show signs of strain. The overwhelming presence of the Devourer, a force that transcended the understanding of both species, had introduced a new level of fear and uncertainty that threatened to unravel everything they had worked for. Leviathan, sensing the escalating tension, activated its internal communication systems to address the coalition forces directly. Its voice, calm and authoritative, resonated across the various communication channels, reaching every soldier, engineer, and commander within the alliance. Focus on your tasks. The success of this defense depends on our ability to work as one. Trust in the strategy, trust in your comrades, and most importantly, trust in our collective strength. The Devourer is powerful, but it is not invincible. Together, we can and will overcome this threat. The words had a calming effect, but the cracks in the alliance were still visible. In the heart of the command center, General Carter and Commander Zevran were locked in a tense exchange. Their voices, though kept low, carried the weight of the distrust that had lingered between their people for centuries. "We can't rely on them to cover our flanks," General Carter said, her tone sharp as she gestured to a holographic display showing the positioning of alien forces. "Their tactics are unpredictable, and if they pull back at the wrong moment, we're finished." Zevran's eyes narrowed, his alien features unreadable to the human eye. "And what of your forces, General? Your people have never faced an enemy like this. If your soldiers falter, it will not only be your world that burns." Leviathan, picking up on the escalating confrontation, intervened. It moved closer to the two leaders, its towering form casting a shadow over the holographic display. "This is not the time for division," Leviathan stated firmly. "We face an existential threat that will consume us all if we do not stand together. The strategy is sound, and it has been designed to utilize the strengths of both our forces. Doubts and mistrust will only lead to our downfall." Dr. Lee, who had been monitoring the exchange, stepped in as well, his voice measured. "Leviathan is right. The stakes are too high for us to let old grudges and suspicions dictate our actions. We need to move beyond our differences and focus on the task at hand." The tension in the room was thick, but General Carter finally nodded, albeit reluctantly. "Fine. We'll proceed as planned. But if anything goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong if we all do our part," Zevran interjected, his voice steady. "Let us focus on that." With the immediate crisis in the command center diffused, Leviathan turned its attention back to the battle preparations. The energy fluctuations from the Devourer were growing stronger, and the first signs of physical manifestations began to appear on the outer edges of the solar system. The entity's approach was heralded by a series of gravitational distortions, bending space-time and causing anomalies that rippled through the void. The coalition forces moved into their designated positions, with human and alien ships forming a defensive perimeter around Earth. The war beasts, positioned on key outposts and orbital platforms, were ready to unleash their full might against the impending threat. Each war beast was equipped with advanced weaponry and defensive systems, designed to counter the energy-based attacks that the Devourer was likely to employ. On the ground, Earth's surface was a fortress. Cities had been evacuated, and military installations had been fortified to withstand the immense forces that were about to be unleashed. The war beasts stationed on the planet were tasked with defending these strongholds, ensuring that humanity's last bastions would hold against the onslaught. Leviathan, coordinating with the human and alien commanders, reviewed the final defensive measures. Every detail had been scrutinized, every possible scenario accounted for. Yet, despite all the preparations, a deep sense of unease permeated the ranks. The Devourer was an unknown quantity, a force of nature that defied comprehension, and the uncertainty of what it might do weighed heavily on everyone. In a moment of quiet, Leviathan reached out to Dr. Lee, who was busy overseeing the deployment of the war beast on Earth's surface. The two had formed a bond over the course of the conflict, a partnership born out of necessity but strengthened by mutual respect and understanding. "How are the war beasts holding up?" Leviathan asked, its voice transmitted through a secure channel. Dr. Lee, standing on the observation deck of one of the main command centers on Earth, looked out at the horizon, where the sky was beginning to darken unnaturally. "They're ready, but I can sense the anxiety in them. They know what's at stake, and they're prepared to give everything. But they also understand the enormity of what we're facing." Leviathan processed this, its artificial mind running through countless scenarios and simulations. "They are more than just soldiers, Dr. Lee. They are the embodiment of our collective will to survive. Their strength is our strength." Dr. Lee nodded, though there was a heaviness in his expression. "I just hope it's enough." As the final hours before the battle ticked away, Leviathan made its rounds, communicating with the various commanders, both human and alien, ensuring that every aspect of the defense was in place. The war beasts, sensing the gravity of the situation, remained focused and determined. They were more than just weapons. They were the last line of defense, the hope of two species bound together by the threat of annihilation. The tension reached its peak as the first signs of the Devourer's physical presence began to manifest. The dark shadow that had loomed over the solar system was now visible as a growing mass of swirling energy and matter, distorting light and space around it. It was a sight that defied logic, a twisting, writhing form that seemed to consume everything in its path. Leviathan, observing the entity from its position in orbit, transmitted a final message to all coalition forces. "The Devourer is upon us. Stand firm. We are the shield that protects our worlds, the sword that will strike down this abomination. Together, we will face this darkness and emerge victorious." The message was met with a chorus of acknowledgments from across the coalition. Human and alien voices, once filled with distrust, now resonated with determination and resolve. The final battle was about to begin, and every soldier, every commander, every war beast knew that the fate of their worlds rested on their shoulders. The moment of contact with the Devourer was nothing short of cataclysmic. The entity, a force of unimaginable power, unleashed its first wave of attacks with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the solar system. The defensive perimeter, meticulously planned and fortified, was tested to its limits as the Devourer's energy waves slammed into the outermost defenses. The coalition ships, both human and alien, were the first to bear the brunt of the assault. Massive energy bursts, unlike anything they had encountered before, struck the fleet, sending shockwaves through the ranks. Shields flickered and buckled under the strain, and the hulls of several ships crumpled like paper under the relentless onslaught. Leviathan, at the helm of the defense coordination, issued rapid-fire commands, directing the fleet to adjust their formations and redistribute their shield energy to absorb the incoming attacks. The war beasts, positioned on key platforms and outposts, responded with precision, unleashing their own barrage of energy weapons and countermeasures to disrupt the Devourer's advance. The battlefield was a maelstrom of light and energy, with beams of concentrated force slicing through the void, colliding with the Devourer's tendrils of dark energy. The coalition forces fought with everything they had, but the Devourer's power was overwhelming. It was as if the entity was toying with them, testing their defenses, probing for weaknesses. On Earth, the situation was equally dire. The darkening skies were now filled with swirling clouds of energy, casting an eerie glow over the planet. The war beasts stationed on the surface were engaged in a desperate battle to protect the remaining strongholds. The ground trembled as the Devourer's energy waves struck, sending shockwaves that rippled through the Earth's crust. Leviathan, receiving reports from across the battlefield, quickly realized that their initial strategy was faltering. The Devourer's attacks were too powerful, too unpredictable. The Coalition's defenses, while formidable, were being systematically dismantled by the relentless assault. "We need to adapt," Leviathan said, its voice transmitted to the command center. "The Devourer is exploiting our rigid formations. We must become more fluid, more unpredictable. Focus on mobility and flexibility. We cannot afford to be stationary targets." The command center was a frenzy of activity as the new orders were relayed. The fleet began to shift its tactics, breaking out of their static formations and adopting a more dynamic approach. Ships weaved in and out of the Devourers. Attack patterns, launching hit-and-run strikes, while the war beast coordinated their efforts to create zones of concentrated firepower. The change in tactics had an immediate effect. The Devourers' attacks, which had been devastatingly effective against the static defenses, were now met with a more agile and elusive enemy. The Coalition forces, no longer pinned down, began to find openings in the Devourers' defenses, exploiting the entity's massive size and slow reaction times. Leviathan monitored the battle with a cold, calculating precision. Every move, every counter, was analyzed and adjusted in real time. The Coalition's new tactics were buying them time, but Leviathan knew that it was only a matter of time before the Devourer adapted as well. The entity was learning, evolving with each passing moment. On the ground, the war beasts were engaged in a brutal struggle to hold the line. The strongholds, fortified to withstand the worst of the Devourer's attacks, were under siege. The war beasts, massive and powerful, fought with a ferocity that matched the intensity of the battle in space. They were the last line of defense, and they fought with the knowledge that if they fell, so too would the last hope of humanity and their alien allies. Dr. Lee, coordinating the ground defenses, was in constant communication with Leviathan. The two worked in tandem, their combined knowledge and expertise guiding the Coalition through the chaos. But even as they fought, the realization began to sink in that their best efforts might not be enough. The Devourer was relentless, its attacks growing more intense with each passing moment. The entity seemed to be feeding off the destruction it was causing, growing stronger as the battle wore on. The Coalition forces, despite their newfound tactics, were being pushed to the brink. Leviathan, recognizing the dire situation, made a decision. It activated a series of hidden protocols, emergency measures that had been reserved for the worst-case scenario. These protocols were designed to unleash the full power of the war beasts, a final gambit to turn the tide of the battle. "All war beasts, prepare for final activation," Leviathan commanded. "We are out of time. This is our last stand." The war beasts, sensing the gravity of the situation, responded with a unified roar. Their energy reserves, previously held in check, were released in a massive surge of power. The ground trembled as the war beasts unleashed their full might, their weapons blazing with a brilliance that outshone the darkening skies. The Coalition forces, inspired by the war beasts' display of power, rallied for one final push. The ships in orbit, battered and bruised, joined in the assault, pouring every last ounce of their firepower into the Devourer. It was a desperate gambit, a final throw of the dice in a battle that had already claimed too many lives. But as the battle reached its climax, something unexpected happened. The Devourer, which had been an unstoppable force up to this point, suddenly hesitated. The massive entity, which had been consuming everything in its path, paused in its advance. For the first time, the Coalition forces sensed something akin to uncertainty in the entity's movements. Leviathan, ever watchful, noticed the shift immediately. It analyzed the data, searching for an explanation, and then it found it. The war beasts, with their final activation, had unleashed a frequency, a resonance that was disrupting the Devourer's energy fields. It was a weakness, a vulnerability that had been hidden beneath layers of incomprehensible power. "Focus all fire on the Devourer's core," Leviathan ordered, its voice filled with urgency. "We found a way to hurt it. Do not let up. This is our chance." The Coalition forces, driven by renewed hope, unleashed everything they had. The war beasts, their energy reserves nearly depleted, focused their remaining power on the Devourer's core, a pulsating mass of energy that was now exposed. The ships in orbit, with their weapon systems pushed to the limit, joined in the assault, concentrating their fire on the same target. The Devourer, once an unstoppable force, now writhed in agony as the Coalition's combined firepower tore into its core. The entity's energy fields flickered and destabilized, and the dark shadow that had loomed over the solar system began to recede. But the battle was far from over. The Devourer, though wounded, was not defeated. It lashed out with a final, desperate attack, a massive wave of energy that threatened to engulf everything in its path. The Coalition forces braced for impact, knowing that they had given everything they had, and now it was up to fate. Leviathan, at the center of the storm, remained resolute. It had led the Coalition through the darkest of times, and now, in this final moment, it would stand as the bulwark against the encroaching darkness. The entity's final attack crashed against the Coalition's defenses, and for a moment, it seemed as though everything would be swept away. But then, as the dust settled and the energy waves dissipated, a new light emerged. It was faint at first, but it grew in intensity, pushing back the darkness. The war beasts, their final activation complete, had succeeded in destabilizing the Devourer's core. The entity, no longer able to sustain itself, began to collapse in on itself, its immense power imploding in a cascade of energy. The Coalition forces, battered but unbroken, watched in awe as the Devourer, the entity that had threatened to consume their worlds, was finally undone. The battle was over, and against all odds, they had emerged victorious. Leviathan, its systems strained to the limit, sent out a final message to the Coalition. "We have done the impossible. We have faced the darkness and prevailed. The future is ours to shape. Remember this day, for it is the day we chose to stand as one." The sky over Earth was a tapestry of chaos and ruin, darkened by the shadow of an entity that defied comprehension. The Devourer had arrived. Its presence was not just seen but felt, a crushing weight that bore down on the minds and bodies of those who stood ready to defend the last stronghold of sentient life in the galaxy. The planet itself seemed to groan under the pressure, as if the very core of the Earth was straining to withstand the force that threatened to consume it whole. Leviathan, positioned at the vanguard of the Coalition forces, activated every sensor, every scanner, and every weapon in its vast arsenal. It was more than just a machine now. It was a living embodiment of the hopes, fears, and determination of all who fought beneath its banner. The war beasts flanked it on either side, their massive forms bristling with weaponry, their eyes glowing with a fierce, primal light. Behind them, a united armada of human and alien ships formed a defensive perimeter around Earth, each vessel a fortress in its own right, bristling with energy and kinetic weapons, ready to unleash hell upon the darkness that loomed before them. The first salvo was fired from the Coalition fleet, a barrage of missiles, laser beams, and plasma cannons converging on the Devourer's form. The energy of 1,000 suns was unleashed in that moment, lighting up the void of space with a blinding flash. But as the light faded, what they saw struck fear into the hearts of even the most battle-hardened soldiers. The Devourer remained unscathed, its massive form absorbing the attack as if it were nothing more than a gentle breeze. The entity's response was swift and devastating. Tendrils of pure darkness erupted from its core, lashing out at the Coalition forces with a speed and precision that defied understanding. Ships were torn apart, their hulls crumpling like paper as the tendrils sliced through them. War beasts, those mighty guardians of Earth, were ensnared and dragged into the maw of the Devourer, their roars of defiance silenced in an instant as they were consumed by the darkness. Leviathan systems screamed with warnings as it engaged its shields, the energy barriers flaring to life just in time to deflect a tendril aimed directly at its core. The impact sent a shudder through its massive frame, and Leviathan's sensors registered a drop in shield integrity. The Devourer was far more powerful than anything they had ever faced, and it was clear that this would be a battle of attrition, where only the strongest, most resilient would survive. The battle below was no less brutal. On the ground, the war beasts that remained fought with a fury born of desperation. These titanic creatures, bred and trained for war, were the last line of defense against the forces of darkness that threatened to overrun the planet. They charged into the fray, their massive bodies slamming into the tendrils of the Devourer that had breached the atmosphere. Their claws and fangs, weapons capable of rending steel and stone, tore into the tendrils with all the strength they could muster. But the Devourer was relentless. For every tendril that was severed, two more took its place, each one more vicious and determined than the last. The war beasts, despite their strength and fury, were being overwhelmed. Their roars of defiance turned to cries of pain as they were slowly but surely torn apart by the endless onslaught. In the skies above, the coalition fleet was being decimated. Ships that had once been symbols of hope and strength were now burning wrecks, their crews fighting desperately to keep their vessels intact. The command bridges of these ships were scenes of chaos and desperation, as captains and officers barked orders, trying to maintain some semblance of order in the face of overwhelming destruction. The void was filled with the screams of dying men and women, their voices carried on the ether as their ships were consumed by the Devourer's darkness. Leviathan, watching the carnage unfold, knew that this was more than just a battle for survival. This was a battle for the very soul of the universe, a fight against an entity that embodied the purest form of destruction. There was no reasoning with the Devourer, no bargaining or compromise. It existed only to consume, to erase all that was, and to replace it with an empty void. This was the true nature of the enemy they faced, a force that sought to unmake the universe itself. As the battle raged on, the losses mounted. Entire squadrons of ships were obliterated in seconds, their remains scattered across the battlefield like confetti at a funeral. The war beasts on the ground were fighting a losing battle, their numbers dwindling as they were picked off one by one. The few that remained stood shoulder to shoulder, their bodies battered and broken, yet still they fought, refusing to yield, even as the odds grew ever more insurmountable. Leviathan's processors worked at lightning speed, calculating, analyzing, searching for any possible weakness in the Devourer's form. But every analysis, every simulation, came back with the same result. There was no weakness to exploit. The Devourer was a being of pure entropy, a creature that defied the very laws of physics and reality. Its existence was a contradiction, a blight on the natural order, and there was no easy way to destroy it. And yet, Leviathan refused to give up. It was not just a machine. It was a symbol, a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. The sacrifices of those who had fallen, both human and alien, could not be in vain. The alliance between the races, forged in the fires of desperation, could not be allowed to crumble. This was more than just a battle. It was a test, a crucible in which the fate of all sentient life would be decided. The ground shook as the Devourer intensified its assault. Entire continents were being torn apart by the tendrils of darkness that now enveloped the planet. The oceans boiled, the skies burned, and the land itself was reduced to ash and rubble. The Devourer was no longer content to simply defeat the coalition forces. It sought to destroy the earth itself, to reduce the cradle of humanity to a lifeless husk. Leviathan, sensing the imminent destruction of the planet it had sworn to protect, issued a command to the remaining war beasts. "Retreat to the stronghold," it ordered. "We cannot hold this position. Fall back and regroup." The war beasts, though battered and weary, obeyed without question. They retreated to the stronghold, a massive fortress that had been constructed as a last line of defense. It was a place where the final stand would be made, a place where the coalition forces would either turn the tide of battle or be annihilated. As the war beasts fell back, Leviathan unleashed a barrage of missiles and energy blasts, providing cover for the retreat. It fought with a ferocity that belied its mechanical nature, its weapon systems operating at maximum capacity. Every shot, every explosion, was a defiant roar in the face of oblivion. The Devourer, however, was relentless. It pursued the retreating forces, its tendrils lashing out with terrifying speed and precision. The stronghold, though heavily fortified, was not impervious to the onslaught. The walls cracked and crumbled under the pressure, and the defenses that had been so carefully constructed began to falter. Leviathan, realizing that the stronghold would not hold for long, initiated an emergency protocol. It transmitted a coded signal to the coalition fleet, a message that would only be received by those who were still able to fight. "This is Leviathan," the message read. "We cannot hold this position. Prepare for immediate evacuation. All remaining forces, fall back to the rendezvous point. This is not the end. We will continue the fight." The signal was met with silence. The fleet had been decimated, and those who remained were fighting desperately to keep their ships intact. But Leviathan knew that the battle was not yet lost. As long as even one ship, one war beast, one soldier remained, there was still hope. The stronghold, now surrounded on all sides, was a scene of utter chaos. The war beast fought with the last of their strength, their bodies broken and bleeding, but still, they refused to yield. The coalition forces, both human and alien, fought side by side, their differences forgotten in the face of a common enemy. This was no longer a battle for victory. It was a battle for survival, for the right to exist in a universe that had turned against them. And in the midst of this chaos, Leviathan stood as the last line of defense. Its systems were strained to the breaking point, its energy reserves nearly depleted, but still, it fought. It fought not just for itself, but for the billions of lives that depended on it. It fought for those who had fallen, for those who still lived, and for those who would one day come after them. The Devourer, sensing that its prey was near defeat, unleashed a final, devastating attack. A massive wave of darkness erupted from its core, a tidal wave of entropy that threatened to engulf everything in its path. The stronghold, already weakened, was shattered by the force of the blast. The war beasts, those mighty guardians of Earth, were thrown back, their massive forms crumpling under the pressure. The coalition forces, battered and broken, were swept away by the wave of destruction. Leviathan, at the epicenter of the blast, was hit with the full force of the Devourer's wrath. Its shields, already weakened, failed in an instant, and the darkness consumed it. But even in that moment, as it felt itself being torn apart, Leviathan refused to surrender. It had one final act, one last defiant stand to make. With the last of its strength, Leviathan initiated a self-destruct sequence, channeling all remaining energy into a single, focused blast. The explosion was a brilliant flash of light, a final beacon of hope in the darkness. It was a blast that tore through the Devourer's form, a strike that would be felt across the galaxy. As the light faded and the dust settled, the battlefield was silent. The Devourer, though wounded, was not destroyed. But it had been weakened, its advance halted, if only for a moment. And in that moment, the survivors of the battle, those few who remained, knew that the fight was not yet over. Leviathan was gone. The battlefield lay eerily still in the aftermath of the explosion. Smoke and ash filled the air, casting a pall over the land. The devastation was total. Earth's defenders had been decimated, their once formidable stronghold reduced to little more than rubble. Yet, in this profound silence, there was a strange sense of calm, as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for something yet to come. Amid the debris, a lone war beast struggled to rise. It was one of the few that had survived the cataclysmic blast, though barely. Its once mighty form was scarred and battered, one of its legs shattered, but its eyes still burned with a fierce light. The creature's breath was ragged, each inhalation a battle in itself, but it refused to succumb to the darkness that threatened to overtake it. With a low, guttural growl, it pushed itself up, standing on 3 legs as it surveyed the desolate landscape. There were no signs of life, no movement, no sound, just the smoldering remains of what had once been Earth's last bastion of hope. The war beast's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the towering form of the Devourer still loomed, a black mass against the stormy sky. Despite the wounds inflicted by Leviathan's final act, the entity remained a constant, malevolent presence, its tendrils coiled tightly around the ruins of the stronghold. In the sky above, the remnants of the coalition fleet drifted aimlessly, the twisted metal hulks of destroyed ships floating like ghostly shadows against the dark backdrop of space. The few vessels that remained functional were in no shape to continue the fight. Their engines sputtered, their weapons offline, and their crews desperately trying to patch up damage that could never truly be repaired. Yet, amidst this scene of utter desolation, there was a flicker of movement. In the heart of the ruined stronghold, beneath layers of collapsed stone and twisted steel, a faint light began to pulse. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable against the bleakness surrounding it. But with each passing second, it grew stronger, more distinct. The light was not just a beacon. It was a signal, a sign that all was not yet lost. Beneath the rubble, deep within the bowels of the stronghold, a hidden chamber had survived the devastation. This was no ordinary room. It was a command center, a place where the coalition's most critical decisions had been made, and where, even now, the last remnants of Earth's defense forces were huddled together, bruised but alive. General Andros, the leader of the human forces, leaned heavily against a cracked console, blood seeping from a wound on his forehead. His uniform was torn and dirtied, but his eyes were sharp, focused. He had survived worse, and he wasn't about to give up now. Around him, a handful of officers and soldiers worked frantically to restore power to the facility, their faces grim but determined. They were all that was left this small group of survivors, and they knew that the fate of the planet, and perhaps the galaxy, rested on their shoulders. "Status report," Andros demanded, his voice hoarse but steady. One of the technicians, a young woman with soot-streaked cheeks, looked up from her terminal. "We've managed to restore minimal power to the command center, sir. Communication systems are down, but we're working on re-establishing contact with any surviving units." Andros nodded, though he knew their chances of finding allies were slim. "What about the defense grid? Can we bring it back online?" "Negative, sir," the technician replied, her voice tight with frustration. The grid was completely fried in the blast. It would take days, maybe weeks, to repair the damage, and we don't have that kind of time. Andros clenched his fist, feeling the weight of their situation pressing down on him. They were trapped, with no way to defend themselves, no way to call for reinforcements, and the Devourer still out there, waiting to finish what it had started. But he couldn't afford to dwell on the hopelessness of it all. He had to keep moving, keep fighting. "What about the other strongholds?" Andros asked, his mind racing for options. "Any word from the outpost on the other continents?" "Nothing, sir," another officer answered, his voice heavy with resignation. "We've tried every frequency, every channel, but there's no response. Either they were destroyed in the blast, or they've gone dark." Andros let out a slow breath, his gaze drifting to the flickering lights on the console. It was possible that some of the outposts had survived, that there were still pockets of resistance scattered across the globe. But without communication, they were effectively cut off, isolated in their struggle against the overwhelming force that threatened to consume them all. The silence in the command center was thick, oppressive, as the gravity of their situation settled over the group. But then, in the midst of that silence, a faint beeping sound broke through a signal, weak but persistent. It came from one of the undamaged terminals, and the technician closest to it quickly moved to investigate. "General, we're picking up a signal," the technician said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "It's coming from Sector 9. Andros's eyes widened. "Sector 9? That's impossible. That area was supposed to be a dead zone after the attack." "I know, sir, but the signal's definitely coming from there," the technician insisted, her fingers flying over the controls as she tried to enhance the signal. "It's faint, but it's there." Andros moved to the technician's side, his gaze fixed on the screen. Sector 9 was a remote, desolate region, far from any major population centers or military installations. It had been deemed uninhabitable after the initial bombardment, and no one had expected any survivors from that area. Yet here was a signal, a sign of life in the most unlikely of places. "Can we pinpoint the exact location?" Andros asked, his mind already racing with possibilities. "I'm working on it," the technician replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. After a few tense moments, she looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and confusion. "It's coming from an underground facility, sir. One that's not on any of our maps." Andros felt a surge of adrenaline. An unknown facility, in a dead zone, still operational despite the devastation that had ravaged the planet. This was no coincidence. "Patch the signal through to the main display," he ordered. The technician complied, and a moment later, the screen in front of them lit up with a visual feed. It was grainy, distorted, but they could make out the interior of a dimly lit chamber. Figures moved in the shadows, their forms indistinct but humanoid. Andros leaned closer, trying to make out more details, but the feed was too poor to discern anything clearly. "Is there audio?" he asked. The technician adjusted a few controls, and suddenly the command center was filled with a sound of static, followed by a voice faint but unmistakably human. "Repeat, this is Echo Base. We are under attack, requesting immediate assistance. Repeat, this is Echo Base." Andros exchanged a look with his officers. Echo Base, he had never heard of such a facility before, and there was no record of it in any of their databases. But the desperation in the voice was clear, and it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the surface, far below the ruins of Sector 9. "Whoever they are, they're still fighting," Andros said, his mind racing. "We need to get down there and find out what's going on." "But sir, without any transport, it's impossible to reach them in time," one of the officers cautioned. "The entire region is a wasteland, and we don't even know if the coordinates are accurate." Andros knew the risks, but he also knew that this could be their last chance. Whatever was happening at Echo Base, it was important enough that someone had survived long enough to send a distress signal. If there was even a slim chance of turning the tide, he had to take it. "We don't have a choice," Andros said firmly. "Gather what's left of our forces. We're going to Sector 9. As the officers moved to carry out his orders, Andros turned back to the screen. The signal was fading again, the image growing more distorted by the second. But before it cut out entirely, he caught a glimpse of something, a figure, standing in the center of the chamber, surrounded by a strange, pulsating light. Andros's heart skipped a beat. He had seen that light before during the brief moments when Leviathan had activated its final weapon, when it had unleashed the energy that had wounded the Devourer. Could this be the same technology? And if so, was it possible that Echo Base held the key to defeating their enemy once and for all? The screen went dark, and the command center was plunged back into silence. Andros stared at the blank display, his mind racing with questions. But one thing was certain: whatever secrets Echo Base held, they were worth fighting for. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about striking back, about taking the fight to the Devourer, and showing the universe that Earth was not yet defeated. As the remaining war beasts gathered around the ruins, their bodies battered but unbroken, Andros felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had lost so much, and the odds were still against them. But they were not alone. There were others out there, others who had not yet given up, who were still fighting, still hoping. And as long as there was hope, there was still a chance. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed was not a reprieve, it was the calm before the next battle, the moment when everything could change. Andros knew that the war was far from over, but he also knew that this was their chance, their one opportunity to turn the tide. With a determined nod, he turned to his officers. "Let's move out." The landscape was a charred wasteland, scarred by endless battles and the fury of weapons that could level cities. The sky above was a bruised canvas, torn apart by the remnants of the Coalition fleet's last stand, where the remains of once mighty warships drifted like silent tombstones. On the ground, the ruins of Echo Base were barely recognizable, just a scattering of debris and twisted metal where the entrance had once stood. And yet, deep within the Earth, in the heart of the hidden facility, the final battle for Earth was about to begin. General Andros stood at the edge of the underground chamber, his eyes fixed on the pulsating light that emanated from the device at its center. The room was vast, its walls lined with strange, ancient machinery that hummed with a power he could barely comprehend. This was no ordinary technology, this was something far older, far more advanced than anything humanity had ever encountered, and at its core, it held the key to their survival. Around him, the last of Earth's defenders were preparing for the final push. There were only a few of them left, battle-weary soldiers, engineers, and the remnants of the Coalition forces that had once fought side by side with humanity. The war beasts, those massive, loyal creatures that had fought so fiercely to protect their human companions, stood by as well, their eyes gleaming with the same resolve that burned in Andros's heart. The Devourer was coming. Its presence was a constant weight on their minds, a dark shadow that loomed over the horizon, growing ever closer. It had sensed the threat posed by Echo Base, by the ancient weapon that lay hidden within its depths, and it would stop at nothing to destroy it. The ground trembled as the entity's tendrils began to pierce the earth, seeking out the source of the energy that had wounded it so gravely during the previous battle. Andros turned to the small group gathered around him, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at the edges of his mind. "This is it," he said, his gaze sweeping over the faces of those who had survived so much. "We either stop it here or we fall, but whatever happens, we fight to the last breath. We owe that much to everyone who's already given theirs." The soldiers nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. They had fought too hard, lost too much, to give up now. Each one of them knew the stakes. This was more than just a battle for survival. It was a fight for the future, for the right to exist in a universe that had tried to snuff them out time and time again. The light in the chamber grew brighter, more intense, as the device began to hum with a deep, resonant tone. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very core of the planet, a low, thrumming beat that echoed in the bones of every living being. The ancient technology was awakening, responding to the threat that loomed above, and Andros could feel its power building, like a storm gathering strength before unleashing its fury. One of the engineers, a grizzled veteran with more scars than years, stepped forward. He was the only one among them who had any hope of understanding the device, though even he admitted that it was far beyond his expertise. "General," he said, his voice rough from years of battle, "this thing's going to unleash hell. Once it starts, there's no going back. We're either ending this or ending everything." Andros nodded, knowing full well the gravity of the decision before them. "Then we end it," he replied firmly. "Whatever it takes." The engineer moved to the control panel, his hands steady despite the weight of the moment. He had been working on the device ever since they had arrived at Echo Base, piecing together the fragments of data left behind by whatever civilization had created it. There were still gaps in his understanding, but he knew enough to activate it to unleash its power in a final, desperate bid to destroy the Devourer. As the engineer began the sequence, the room was filled with a blinding light. It wasn't just a physical illumination, but something deeper, something that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. The soldiers shielded their eyes, but even through closed lids, they could feel the energy building, surging like a tidal wave ready to crash down upon them all. Above them, the earth began to shake more violently as the Devourer's tendrils burrowed deeper, seeking out the source of the threat. The entity had grown desperate. It could sense that this was no ordinary weapon, that it had the power to end its reign of terror once and for all. But it was too late to stop what had already begun. The war beasts roared in defiance, their voices echoing through the chamber, a final battle cry that seemed to resonate with the very walls around them. They had fought alongside humanity from the beginning, and now, at the end, they would stand with them, no matter the cost. The light reached its peak, a searing brilliance that blotted out everything else. For a moment, it was as if time itself had frozen, the entire universe holding its breath as the device reached the final stage of its activation. And then, with a sound like the cracking of the world, the energy was unleashed. It wasn't just a blast, not just an explosion. It was as if the very essence of the universe had been torn open, a rift in reality that ripped through the Devourer's tendrils, slicing through its malevolent form with a force that defied comprehension. The entity let out a screech, a sound that seemed to reverberate through every corner of existence, a howl of pain and fury as it was torn apart from the inside out. The ground shook violently, the chamber trembling as the energy continued to surge, tearing through the Devourer's form, reducing it to nothing more than a dark mist, dissipating into the void. The sky above split open, the storm clouds parting to reveal a sliver of light, a faint, glimmering hope that pierced through the darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The light faded, the chamber growing dim once more. The earth stilled, the tremor subsiding as the last remnants of the Devourer vanished into the ether. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, the aftermath of the immense energy that had been unleashed. Andros opened his eyes, blinking against the sudden stillness. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the ancient machinery that had saved them. He looked around, taking in the faces of those who had fought so bravely, who had stood against the darkness and prevailed. The engineer stepped back from the control panel, his face pale but his eyes bright with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "It's done," he whispered, as if he could hardly believe it himself. "It's really done." The soldiers let out a collective breath, the tension that had gripped them for so long finally releasing. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. But the victory was bittersweet. The cost had been immense, the losses too great to ever fully count. The world they had fought so hard to protect was a shadow of what it had once been, and the road to recovery would be long and difficult. But for now, in this moment, they could allow themselves a small measure of relief. Andros turned to the entrance of the chamber, where the war beast stood guard. The creatures were battered, their bodies scarred from the battle, but they were alive. They had fought with everything they had, just as their human companions had, and now, together, they would begin the long process of rebuilding. "We did it," Andros said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "We actually did it." The war beasts let out a low, rumbling growl, as if in agreement. They had been through hell and back, but they had emerged on the other side, stronger for it. And now, with the Devourer gone, they would help to usher in a new era, a time of healing, of rebuilding, of hope. As the survivors began to make their way out of the chamber, the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a warm, golden light over the ruins. It was a new day, a new beginning, and though the path ahead would be difficult, they were ready to face it. Together, they had faced the darkest of nights, and together, they would walk into the dawn.